Hey there, my name is Megan and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be recommending my favorite fantasy and science fiction standalone adult books. I feel like series are definitely more common in the fantasy genre and sometimes the science fiction genre than standalones, but I've come across some good standalones in my time as a reader, so I thought I would share them all with you guys. But before we go ahead and get on into the books, if you are not already subscribed to my channel, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button as well as the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I post new content. I post new videos every Wednesday and every Saturday and sometimes on Monday. I'm going to be talking about my fantasy books first, so if you're interested in just checking out the science fiction recommendations, I'll put a timestamp down below. The first book I'm going to be talking about is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. This is the first Neil Gaiman book that I ever read, and out of the few that I have read, I think this one is probably my favorite. But in this book, we follow a guy named Richard, and one day, Richard comes across a bleeding girl on the sidewalk, and he decides to help her and gets transported into this kind of alternate London, this underground London. And this London is just filled with monsters and mayhem, and Richard has to basically get back home and also try and figure out what's going on with this girl whose name is Door. And first off, I really like books that have kind of alternate realities. Victoria Schwab's Shades of Magic trilogy, that kind of has the same thing. I personally like that trope. And honestly, the main reason that I like this book are the villains. There are two men that are hunting Richard and Door, and they are probably one of the creepiest pairs of villains that I have read about in like any fantasy series, especially a standalone. They were just cringeworthy. So those two villains have stood out to me even now, even though I read this years ago, which is why I decided to include this on my list. It's just a good adventure story where you are dealing with things that don't seem possible and trying to reconcile like the regular world to a fantasy world with regards to our main character, Richard. And then we have those villains. So definitely a book I would check out if you are a Neil Gaiman fan. The next book I'm going to be talking about is Race the Sands by Sarah Beth Durst. I do have a full spoiler-free review of this book if you're interested in checking it out. I read it last year. I was lucky enough to receive an art copy before it came out, and this was the first book that I ever read by Sarah Beth Durst. But this is a desert fantasy, and the world is just so unique. But in this world, there is an afterlife and reincarnation, and based on how morally good you are in this life will depend on what you are reincarnated as in the next life. And those that are just horrible people are reincarnated as these monsters. But the people at the car have figured out a way to get these monsters and race them, kind of like horse racing. And there are people that train their whole lives to race these monsters. We follow a mom character named Tamra, who used to be a racer but decided to become a trainer due to some issues. And then we follow a girl that decides to become a racer due to some bad circumstances at her home, and Tamra kind of takes her under their wing. And they end up finding a monster. But there's more to this monster than meets the eye, and it kind of, once they start investigating the mystery, unravels this whole backstory and all of this corruption, and really makes them question everything that they thought they knew about reincarnation and these monsters and the afterlife and all of that. I felt like for a fantasy, a standalone fantasy, it was extremely well done. The world was incredibly rich, the story was very well structured, and the mom character, Tamra, is definitely one of my favorite female characters of a fantasy. So I definitely recommend this if you want just a standalone fantasy that has a very vivid world and characters that you want to root for. The next book is Uprooted by Naomi Novik. This is the first book of Naomi Novik's that I ever read, and I really enjoyed it. But in this world, we follow a village that lives on the outskirts of this evil forest, and there is a wizard known as the Dragon who lives in this tower, and he protects the people from this forest. And every 10 years, he comes down and he chooses a girl from the village to come live with him in his tower, and then those girls are really never seen again. And our main character, Agnieszka, thinks that her best friend, who is beautiful and smart and perfect, is going to get chosen, but the dragon comes down to her village and actually chooses her. And then the story kind of goes from there. So we learn more about the dragon, we learn more about the evil forest and what actually is going on in there, and then we actually learn more about Agnieszka because there's definitely more to her than meets the eye, and then there's a lot of dynamic between her and the dragon. So I really enjoyed this book. I love evil forest tropes, and this has kind of like a Beauty and the Beast inspiration to it. And definitely just the magic in the forest is what I absolutely love the most. I think that Naomi Novik has beautiful writing. This was so atmospheric and so there was so much imagery. I really enjoyed the writing. And I keep saying I want to pick up more of Naomi Novik's work. I have two of her books that I need to get to and still haven't read it. But every time I see Uprooted, I remember how much I liked it. And I was like, I really need to read more of her books. So I definitely recommend Uprooted for a good standalone fantasy. The next book is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This was definitely one of my favorite books that I read in 2020. It made it into my top 10 list of last year. But in this book, we follow a girl named Addie LaRue, and she was born in the 1700s. But in order to escape an arranged marriage type situation, Addie makes a deal with a demon, and he grants her her wish. But the consequence is that she will be immortal, but no one will remember her name or anything about her. She can make no imprint or mark on the world. So we follow Addie's journey from the 1700s to 2014 and how she has learned to navigate a world where she basically is existing as a ghost. She meets people, but they forget her. She can't develop relationships. The only person that she has any interaction with who can remember her is the demon himself, Luce, who constantly reappears throughout her 300 years. Addie is extremely resilient and persistent, intelligent, and you really, really feel for her and her hardships. I love this book because it had some really, really complex themes. The writing was beautiful. There was good romance. The curse was really interesting, and the parameters of the curse were really well done. The next book we have is Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. This is Sanderson's first published work, and it is a standalone. Even though it does technically take place within his Cosmere, it can definitely be read, and you can read no other Sanderson and still be fine. But we follow a world where there was this city called Elantris that was beautiful and magnificent and perfect, and the Elantrians were almost immortal, and anybody could become an Elantrian if they experienced the Shead, or the transformation. But 10 years ago, Elantris fell into ruin, and the Elantrians became these zombie-like people. We follow two perspectives. We follow Prince Raoden, who was the prince of the city outside of Elantris, who experiences the transformation and ends up being cast into Elantris, and he has to kind of figure out the city's history, what happened, kind of deal with the people that live inside because they are crazy. And then we follow a girl named Serene, who was Raoden's betrothed. And when she gets to the city of Kai, she realizes that he has died, but she gets stuck there because their marriage contract was valid even though he's dead. So she ends up having to learn the political machinations of this city. She uncovers what's happening. She realizes that there is a threat outside of Elantris, an invading force. So we have all of these different conflicts happening both outside of Elantris and Kai and inside Elantris and Kai. I really, really enjoyed this book because the politics were just so intricate and so detailed. And we had two characters that were basically doing everything that they could to make sure that their cities and the people that they loved survived and were going to be able to withstand what was coming for them. And I just loved the magic system of this. It wasn't too complicated, and it wasn't something that was really forced down your throat. It was more subtle, I think, than a lot of Sanderson's other books. This book was a lot of fun. It is really heavy on the politics. It is really heavy on the religion rather than the action. But if you're someone that really enjoys like intricate political fantasies, then I definitely recommend this. And then we have Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson, and this is another standalone that fits within his Cosmere, but you don't have to have read any of the other books in order to understand it. This is a good standalone. It does have a complete plot. Our characters do have their own character arcs, and the ending is wrapped up. In this book, we follow two different kingdoms that used to kind of be alike and the same, and then they split into two different kingdoms. And one of these kingdoms has gods, which are kind of like these reincarnated humans, and they are just treated and revered by the people of that kingdom. And then we have the adjoining kingdom that is much more conservative, and we have two sisters, Vivenna and Ciri. And when Vivenna was young, her father promised her to marry the god king of the other kingdom, but once the time comes for him to send her off, he can't part with her, so he sends her younger sister Ciri. And Ciri has never been prepared for any type of responsibility. She's very carefree, and when she gets there, just things are not what it seems. But Vivenna won't let her sister go without her help. So she follows after Ciri in an attempt to save her, and she ends up getting involved in some things in the city, and then the story kind of goes from there. I really like the magic system of Warbreaker. I think it's definitely my favorite. Every single person is born with what is known as a breath. It's like an innate breath, and those breaths can be given up, but they can't be stolen. And the gods basically survive on donations of breaths from people. And these breaths can be used to animate inanimate objects. And we see a lot of that. And, the more breaths you have, the more powerful you get. There's different things that you can do. And it was just really interesting. I absolutely love the magic system in this book. I feel like the characters are great. We have Siri, who is just, extremely spunky, and she will find out what she needs to find out. And then we have the caring older sister Vivenna. And then we have Lightsong, who is a god who doesn't really believe he is a god. And he provides a lot of comedic relief to the story. And he ends up getting involved with Siri and helping uncover the things going on in the court. So it's definitely a really fun book. And I think it's a good entry point into Sanderson if you're interested in trying out his work. Now I'm going to be sharing with you four of my favorite standalone science fiction books. The first one is Recursion by Blake Crouch. I know a lot of people didn't really like this book, or they liked Dark Matter more than this book. I personally liked Recursion more. Something about the story just spoke to me. I was more invested in the sciencey aspect of it. But in this world, we follow a bunch of people that have been experiencing memories of a life that they didn't live. And this is called false memory syndrome. And people are actually committing suicide because they think they're going crazy because they're experiencing these things that they don't know if they're real or not, or if they happened, or if they are having some sort of mental breakdown. And it's really affecting a lot of the population. And we follow a character named Helena, and Helena is actually developing a way for people to extract their memories and be able to relive these memories over and over. Barry starts investigating these suicides and this false memory syndrome, and that leads him to Helena, and their paths cross, and together they embark on trying to figure out what's actually going on. And I found that this book was so fast paced, and I just ate it up. I read it so quickly. It involves a lot of physics and a lot of scientific explanations, a lot of theory, and it also includes time travel elements, which I am not a fan of time travel, but for this book, it definitely worked. And I just felt like the reliving of the memories and having to revisit those timelines over and over and over was just incredibly interesting. So definitely, if you're looking for a good sci-fi thriller that you will finish in a day, I would recommend Recursion. Next, we have Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. This was originally published in 1968, and it is the book that the Blade Runner movies are loosely based off of. In this book, it is the year 2021, and Earth has basically ruined itself. Most living creatures have become extinct. There has been a mass exodus off of Earth to Mars, which is now colonized. And there is a corporation that has started creating basically life, because life is not something that is as sustainable on Earth as it used to be. So they are creating false sheep, false cats, all of these false beings, and eventually they start to create false humans. These androids are indistinguishable from regular humans. They are embedded with artificial intelligence, and they begin to wreak havoc on life as we know it. Our main character is a bounty hunter, and his job is to hunt down these androids and kill them. I love this book so much because I really love the themes that it presents about the role of technology in our lives in the future and what it means to be human. Are you still human if you're artificially created? What exactly makes us human? So I just feel like the themes in this book are so profound, and ones that we really don't have an answer to at this time, and we can speculate on. And I'm really looking forward to reading more of Philip K. Dick's works. I bought one of his anthologies for Christmas, and definitely an author that I think will become one of my favorite sci-fi writers. And next we have The Martian by Andy Weir. I feel like this is a sci-fi staple book at this point in time, and most people know the story, but if you're not familiar with it, it follows an astronaut named Mark Watney, and he is on a mission to Mars to basically start studying Mars. He is a botanist, that is his job, and something happens in the beginning of the book where his team is forced to leave, and they leave him behind because they think that he got killed. So he has to survive on Mars until someone can come and get him, but it takes years and years and years to travel from Earth to Mars. So he has to learn how to survive in a hospitable environment, how to grow things, how to eventually communicate with Earth, and we follow his journey. This book is mostly in the format of like journal entries, log entries, and I feel like that really, really worked for this story. We are inside of Mark Watney's head the whole time. He is guiding us through his thought process, why he's making these decisions, what he has to do, the scientific explanation behind them. I thought it was incredibly interesting. And there's a lot of humor in this book. Our character, despite the situation that he's in, never loses his sense of humor, which is really, really interesting. So this book I really enjoyed. I do feel like it is a bit textbooky at time with regards to explaining the scientific processes. It can drag a little bit. That was my only criticism of it, but I feel like if you are a sci-fi fan, you should definitely check this out. I think it's something that every sci-fi reader should read. And the last book I'm going to be talking about is Mem by Bethany C. Morrow. This is more of a speculative sci-fi than like high heavy sci-fi, and we follow an alternative history. So this takes place in, I think it's the 20s or 30s in Canada, and in this alternative history there's a scientist that has learned how to extract memories from people and implant them into these humanoid type creatures that are alive, but they can't think for themselves. They get this memory in their head and then they relive this memory over and over again, and they're known as mems. All of these mems are kept in this vault, so people can like pay to have their memories extracted. So we follow the story of Dolores, who is a mem, and she gets a memory implanted in her, but she functions as a regular human. She is able to create her own memories, and we're basically following her journey. And this is such a character-driven book because, similar to Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, it really, really raises those questions about what makes us human. What is our place in society? You know, how do I reconcile a life that's not mine, that I'm living inside my head? Another theme with recursion, too. So a lot of these are similar. I guess that's why I like them. But I really loved Dolores' story. I really loved her as a character, and it made me tear up a little bit at the end. I will say it is slow burn, and it is way more character driven than sci-fi driven, but it does have really interesting sci-fi elements, and it really makes you think. Plus, it's super short. You can knock this out in a couple of hours, so I highly recommend it. Okay, you guys, so that is it for 10 fantasy and science fiction standalone book recommendations that I think everybody should at least give a try. Let me know in the comments if you have read any of these and what you thought of them. Also, if you have any standalone book recommendations, and I will see you guys soon in another video. Goodbye.